Oh, hello, gang. Hey, everybody. Hey, Matt. Hey, Dan. Good to see you guys again.
Howdy.
So welcoming the audience. We're just this episode we wanted to kind of take on a topic that we delved into a few episodes ago, which was basically the office politics episode, part one, and we decided that it was so rich that we wanted to have a part two. So in that episode, just for a quick recap, we talked about really how us in our roles as coaches, as agile coaches or coaches, would take on, how do we navigate office politics, by using the political activist stance, right? Obviously, as coaches, you have different stances, right? As a counselor, as a modeler, as a partner, teacher, hands-on expert, so there's different stances, and one of those stances that's not really that's not there's not real documentation. There's not any real head-on sort of you know discussion, debate, talk around it is the political activist stance, which take So we talked about that last episode, and we think we had quite a bit to say about it. And I think essentially wanted to give sort of a part two to that, because I think there's some some areas that we wanted to really touch a little bit more on, and as far as, like, for instance, just to kick it off, maybe, um you know why is that uncomfortable, and why is it important to just go ahead and embrace that, and as something that you cannot circumvent, because it's for me, politics is human dynamics. So, and different power structures and how they reveal themselves behind that. So, um, I think all three of us will have had experiences in the space of working in sort of big corporate entities, right? Where have these complex organizations with a layover of big politics, right? With positioning, with power, with influence, and how eventually I serve my own self-interest versus the company interest, et cetera. So how maybe to kick it off to you, Dan, first, like what did you want to
Yeah.
maybe touch on, with this
Well, so I'll throw out one of the things. So I've been, it is politics season here, and I've been, I went into, I over the weekend, I went to a theater and I saw the movie Reagan. So I'm sort of steeped in politics over here, and I've been watching old Reagan debates, and I watch political stuff, even though it kind of makes me sick with the way that it goes on here in the U.S. But I've been watching it, and there was this really great discussion with Eric Weinstein, um, and hold to the side for a second that he can be very polarizing, and he can say things that people don't like, and he can support a candidate that some people don't like. I get it. I get it. Hold all that to the side. Guy's brilliant. Like, I listened to him. I've actually never heard him talk before. Guy's absolutely brilliant. The stuff he talks about, I'm like, I'm half understanding what you're talking about. Because he's in a realm that I don't study. But he's talking about all this stuff, and I'm like, wow, you're really brilliant. So I'm listening to him, and he talked about how politics. He said, it used to be that you'd have these sort of these debates, and you'd have people come together, and it would be like, I don't know. He didn't say it this way, but I'm gonna say it's like the adults in the room, like they were sitting there talking, and these
mm,
people had some knowledge about what they were talking about, and that's how you moved people. He says now, the analogy he uses, he said in the classroom, it's the people with the spitballs in the back, spitting the spitballs. They're the ones who drive the conversation, because they're out there throwing out all these stupid memes. And he's like, everything becomes a meme. And he was talking about permanence, that like there's no sort of like permanence of thing. We instantly memify something. And his example
mm,
was, the picture of Trump holding up his fist. He said it was 4 seconds later, he said it was a meme. He's like, everything that happens becomes a meme, and we just memify everything. And it's that drives the conversations. And the tie-in here is that, we were talking about this real organization chart, which, I saw on LinkedIn through a source. I won't get into that right now. So I saw this thing, and there is a certain amount of, now in that case, I think it was a well thought through memification, but it was a memification. So you see all these things that happen, and people who are kind of throwing spitballs. I don't see it moving conversations as much with it. Like I don't see executives moving because of them, but I do see a bunch of people like the masses on LinkedIn. They'll see these things and they'll rally around it and we'll have conversation. I don't see it moving executives, partly because they're not elected like the elected. So it doesn't matter that the masses are moving because they're not elected. Anyway, so that's my starting point. Is I'm sort of interested in that we see that happening in the outside political world. We see parts of it here within corporate. But you don't really see that memification driving the conversation and moving things forward in the corporate world.
Yeah. What about you, Matt? I mean, just maybe real quick, maybe the link there could be, oftentimes you'll hear a lot. I think we've all heard it. One point is, I don't want to get involved in politics, right? Or even in the regular space, which is out in the open, not in the office, you hear somebody say, I'm apolitical, meaning it's too much for me. I don't want to get involved, right? And so the danger, whether it's in the office or in the outside world, is the environment, right? Not feeling inclusive because you don't have the vocabulary, or because you may come across as somebody who's just putting out spitballs because you don't have either the vocabulary, the history, the heuristics, or whatever to make you feel welcome and to be given a seat at the table. And so the danger is it feeling more and more exclusive as opposed to inclusive. And so people find other platforms to then, right, whether it be social media or whatever, to then, say what they want to say, or which may make sense, which may be memifications of more complex topics or not. So, I mean, what do you think about that, Matt?
Well, I think that's an interesting thing that Dan's brought up, yeah, about memes. I'm interested in the fact that did I get this right? You don't think that happens in the corporate environment? Is that what you're saying? How
Yeah,
does
I
it?
guess. So let me put, and I'll use a I think he's a British comedian, the guy that does Mr. Bean. I saw somebody
Yeah,
had up a
Rowan
quote,
Atkinson.
and he's talking about how like
Legend.
comedy has to be dangerous, right? You have to talk about sort of taboo topics, or like comedy is risky and like that. There's an element, otherwise it's not funny. And so I think that there is an element of social change has happened over time through comedy, but now there's a fear of whatever, people getting, quote unquote canceled or what. And so people stay away from topics. I've heard any number of comedians talk about it. I think in a corporate environment, I've seen cases where people have posted meme type things on like Slack and they get fired. So I don't think that memes drive the corporate conversation. And because I just don't think they happen as much, at least with, anyway, I do see it on LinkedIn, but I don't see what happens on LinkedIn, even though it's funny, I don't see it translating to change, at least not at the top.
Yeah.
Right, because I think maybe there is, and I can't see the boundary between the outside and the inside world of the corporate world, and even at the top, probably even, I don't know. I was gonna say especially at the top, but I just think everywhere, and I think like, to me, nice quote you've coined there, memification. Is that an actual thing? Do people use that already? Memification. Anyway, it's lovely.
No, I love it.
There's a memification. Yeah,
let's check our sources and see if we.
Let's do that. There's a memification of all things, I think. Which is because it's just like because since I think it was coined in the 70s, memes, and since that point, I mean, I was born in 1974, so that's all I know, 70s and onwards. And I remember people talking about like the 80s being about sound bites. And I think memes are the evolution of that. Even though I think memes were coined before, and it's about culture in it and imitation and like an echo chamber of things, so that things become tropes, and they're used as shorthand and stuff like that, shortcuts
And go
to
viral.
make a message. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that corporate life is discussed openly in the same way as party politics, national and international politics are covered openly and discussed openly on social media. I mean, social media is the nest of all of these things, isn't it? The playground for all of this stuff. And I feel like I do see that happen. I feel like I suppose like what you said there is that when you take it from external social media and put it on an internal social media, the stakes are higher and you could get fired. Because now it's like if you were, I suppose even in some circumstances, if an employer monitored your social media channels and handles that were outside of work, there are some terrible people who would hold that against you in work and might try and get you fired.
Especially if it touched a third rail topic.
Yeah. And the thing is, like that for
What's the
me,
third rail topic?
I assume that was a bit
sort of bright lines. Like if you started,
don't
you know,
touch that.
yeah, if you went out and you said, Adolf Hitler was a good person, that's sort of like you probably are that's probably gonna result in some backlash, right? So like there are certain things that you cannot touch.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are blurry lines about that, and so actually people probably wouldn't go there, would they? But it's when they go somewhere and unexpectedly they find this is a third rail topic for those people who I work
Exactly.
I've set off a chain reaction there, and there's some backlash.
Well, I'll give you a concrete example of that, which is when I was, working at big bank company. There was this thing, they were redoing the offices and someone they had this committee that was like working and putting up posters and quotes. And one of the quotes they put on the wall was from Henry Ford. And it was some banal quote of Ford's that to me, I was like, whatever, it's talking about progress or whatever, something awesome. But somebody was like genuinely super offended. And they said, I'm Jewish. And did you know that Henry Ford was, anti-Semitic? I'm like, it's a quote, man. Like it didn't bother me. I was also not the person who put it up, but I'm like, it's like there were so many things that the committee eventually said, we're just not going to do quotes anymore because you have to attribute it. It's probably falsely attributed because that's hard to prove. And then even once you put it up, someone's going to be offended by something. And so we're just not going to do quotes.
I think that's
Go
getting into a slightly different topic of sensitivities and things like that.
Sure. Okay.
And I, like you, know that it's a whole minefield and we have to be careful and we suffer consequences. But I think this memification, politics, office politics that we have to be careful of is that because people use these power situations, power and influence, like someone without power could put forward an opinion or even test an opinion out of that. Do I really? I've said this before on previous podcasts. How do I know what I think until I see what I say? So sometimes people put ideas out into the open so that they can understand how people react to this.
I'll get.
So think, do I really think this? This might be something I've heard. I'm regurgitating. I'm saying out loud, and all that sort of stuff. And you could fall foul of that because if someone else with power then says, like, takes it in whatever way they want, they can cause you harm from that. And that's a real office politics thing, I think. And I think what's quite interesting at the moment is there is a lot of the memification of inside corporate worlds going on LinkedIn and on if he's out there and this annoys him, good, Twitter, because I know he tunes in. So it'll be on LinkedIn, it'll be on Twitter, all this stuff about inside the and my latest, the one at the moment that I think is interesting or hilarious, I'm not really sure. It's like the founder mode thing. So that this is like there's a weird similarity between founder mode. I think I might be being too harsh. I might have gone over a boundary, and like, political demagoguery.
So just for our viewers, tell us what is founder mode? Real quick, just in a
So it's this thing that's come up lately. A couple of people have spoken about it, brought it to my attention. I actually asked Dan because it was on some what's it? Is it Paul Graham's essays?
Paul Graham, yeah.
Yeah, and Dan knew, and I was like, Dan, what is it? What's going on here? And so Dan pointed me at the essay. So I read the essays, which is I think from this month, earlier this month. And it
Mhm,
centers on Brian Chesky, Airbnb,
mhm, mhm,
deciding to take back control and have a real control about everything that gets done in his organization,
mhm, mhm.
which, of course, as a founder, in the early days of founding something, you're expected to have a say and be active within everything that's going on.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
especially when there's like, we've all seen the pictures of 6 people in a room around one desk in someone's front room. And obviously, as you scale and an Airbnb, and Brian's been massively successful and he's got thousands of people, it's this flip back into, okay, before this I have devolved responsibilities and brought people in. Now I'm getting back in it. I might get rid of a load of people and I'm going to get back into it and I'm going to control everything,
Mhm,
which is a really interesting. That's like an interesting ideology, and he's been fated for it. There's a lot of people saying this is where it needs to go.
mhm.
And and in a climate where there are a lot of layoffs, it's like, ooh, is this the way to go?
Yeah, yeah.
Is
It's
this the right way?
interesting.
Because it feels like a real ideology and a real, like, and
Yeah.
there'll be consequences for people. So I'm not so sure about that.
Well,
And
I
there's
mean, some
memes
would,
springing up about that already.
yeah. So some would say, for instance, that Zuckerberg has never left founder mode, right?
Yeah,
And so I say that because I was just watching a documentary. I can't remember. I think it was on this French, done by French media here, Canal Plus, I think, did a documentary on just
yeah,
the ascension and the person, sort of his growth, and how he changed within the course of the life cycle of Facebook, Meta, acquiring Instagram, and how he went from somebody who had a vision and wanted to instill that vision to how it grew, the influences around him. They talked about Teal when he came in, and
right.
influence was his ideology in terms of the control of media and sort of the space of tech in all things that deal with growth in society and how we evolve. And so they did a big part, especially when he got summoned into Congress to discuss the impact of Facebook, with some of the different conflicts because of how the platform is used,
Yeah.
or some of the the last election, right, with what was the name of that company again, Dan, that heavily
Cambridge
influenced
Analytica.
Cambridge Analytica, exactly.
Yeah, which heavily influenced Brexit votes, apparently.
Exactly,
And
exactly,
yeah,
and they touched on that as well, right? They touched on the Rohingyas as well, and so you know, yeah, I think that that's why when you brought up that founder mode, it's the the whole sort of environment, right, is obviously then completely um swayed in a direction because of who's in control, who has that power. And so, I one of my clients in the past they would have a town hall, right? This is a company that was across multiple countries in Europe, and so had a very town hall approach, which was quite Anglo-Saxon, quite American, right? And so that was their way of dealing with change, offering a platform for people to ask questions, right? And so when things started getting bad because of the economic downturn, et cetera, you felt some of the questions that were upvoted, right, in the town hall by the people who were attending, the messages that the audience wanted they to be relayed. It became like a pulpit for everyone to just pile on. Hey, we've got the leadership here. We're going to upvote these specific questions, and some of them may be deemed toxic or, kind of just tongue in cheek or whatever. But it became, they tried to do their best to moderate it, and but people would actually start communicating, because I was in the background looking at some of the conversation messages, some of the subgroups where they would say, hey, I'm going to post this question. You guys go ahead and upvote it. And so that's where you see the memification, because that's a form of memification. And that's one instance where a leader in tech had a specific incident. I can't remember what it was. And somebody posted a question, how long is it, how long is it going to take you guys to figure out to fire this guy? Why is he still here? And that thing got upvoted like crazy. I think it had like a record. So, so that, and it's, in a way that kind of became a meme, because people started screenshotting it and sending it around on Slack. And they, leadership did their best they deleted it, but it was too late. And that became, so it's interesting just to sort of, you're looking, juxtaposing sort of different cultures that are created, because of these sort of, we have these platforms which connect this in real time now, and sort of can give, add fuel to the fire on specific things that people may feel, but aren't able to really address, or their way of venting frustration. And so, juxtaposing that with founder mode, is really interesting, because founder mode is, there's one boss, it's sort of, right. This one guy whose vision we have to adhere to, and you either follow suit, or, you kind of take a high tech program. So,
well, I mean, the poster boy of that is Jobs, isn't it?
Yeah, I was just thinking like that.
Jobs.
Yeah.
And I think that's all who these
Model.
people look up to.
Mm-hmm.
And of course you would. I get that. I get that. But on the meme thing, I think we're changing the title of this conversation as we go. It's got to be something about memes, isn't it? On the meme thing, like it being sort of a cultural trope, or an echo chamber of an idea that sort of spreads through technology. It feels a bit like Zuckerberg and maybe Brian Chesky are memes of Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They are becoming memes of a person.
Yeah.
Well, even right, I think I'm pretty sure it was Steve Jobs who was on stage when he said something to the effect of like, we hire all these smart people and tell them to do, why would we do that? Why don't we just hire these smart people and get out of their way? So like there is, and in that talk now, Paul Graham said he wasn't going to regurgitate the talk, but apparently Brian talks about how the advice to him was like, hire smart people and get out of their way. And he's like, well, that's wrong. I need to get involved.
Yeah.
And so it kind of ties back to our last conversation of office politics, and that, like I had said, oh, well, like executives, they don't care how people work. And frankly, I don't think they should. And I know that Matt is like, well, they should. Well, the extreme of caring about how they work is Brian Chesky taking on his
his
right, idea of what Steve Jobs was, of like, I'm going to go all the way into the weeds. But what I find interesting is that when I read through that, it seemed like Chesky he's defending that mode of operating by saying, well, but the thing is, before I did that, I was getting all these emergencies, and 9 out of 10 of them would be bad. And now, as I dive deep, I'm less busy, and people are actually doing what I wanted them to do. And essentially, he doesn't say this, I don't even need to be there. And the emergencies that come to me, 9 out of 10 of them are great, and they're good news, and 1 is bad news. So this is like, this shows that it's good. So my question would be, well, but you're saying that you're saying that the way to operate is to be in control. But by being in control, you're saying what that's achieved is you not having to be as much in control. So which one is the good one? Does that mean you now need to get back in? Like it seems, and point being, I think there's a middle ground here. I don't think the answer is you hire people and you just like, that's laissez-faire, just let them do whatever. I think that's silly. You need to provide vision and guidance and have some sort of. Steve Jobs was notorious for, he was a visionary and had ideas. But like if you read Ken Kosienna's book on what does he call it? I forget the title of his book, but it's brilliant. He's talking about the autocorrect feature on the first iPhone. Steve wasn't there telling them how to do it. Like they were coming up with all these ideas and having debates, and they did bring it to Steve at the end and say, here's what we've come up with. and he would say the things he didn't like, but he wasn't there with them in that room doing all the things. And he wasn't involved in the selection of all the various options that were out there. He wasn't involved. He got an output of it. So I think he's the one that said, we have to have this thing. There has to be no keyboard. He set the ground rules, but he let people do what they wanted. And so anyway, I think there's a balance. I don't think it's, I'm all the way involved. I don't think it's, I'm all the way hands off. I don't know. Maybe that's just becoming my trope is I don't believe it's one way. I don't believe it's an extreme. I think it's there's a middle.
I mean, I'm thinking of, there's two things you brought up. I mean, we're talking about, I mean, let's, if we just honest, tech is, there's a lot of ego involved in tech, right? And I think tech itself is in the midst of trying to evolve, whether it be from a diversity, right, standpoint. What is diversity in tech? Is it strictly, geographic? Is it strictly, is it based on, sex? Are we trying to get more, women into tech, into leadership positions of tech? Like, so how does that diversity cultivated? But, again, there's a lot of ego because it's a very meritocratic environment, right? And it's based on, what I have achieved that helps me get this influence or this position, which then allows me to, move up on the upper echelon, be recognized for it. And then there's awareness. And then the awareness part that comes in is that the minute you realize, whether you're Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg, or Matt or Dan or whoever, that however powerful and influential you may be as a leader, you're not the one who's out there who's going to put in that autocorrect feature, right? And test it and A/B test it and tinker with it until it fits right and is pushed out into production. Then, there's a limit to how much self-serving or, the organization you design needs to be to feed you with all the information you need to make decisions, right? How much do you need to then delegate, right? And so how do you curtail that founder mode so that you allow enough room and space for people to feel comfortable experimenting, innovating, all these buzzwords that we like to use, failing safely or whatever, or learning, whatever you want to call it. And you at the same time, being, it's a very delicate balance between that ego and awareness thing where that I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what exercise or how they have that conversation within themselves. Am I doing too much? Or am I, do I need to go full gung ho here because it's in the best interest of what I feel the company direction it needs to go to. So and I feel all leaders deal with that. And so I feel even my job, has been made. The toughest times I've had is, how do I tap into a leader who's brought me in to help them, but they either haven't had the awareness or humility to say, here's where my shortcomings are, right? I need help in this specific realm or not, whether I recognize it or not. And so, so that awareness piece for me is huge. And it's tough when there's so much going on at the same time. So I don't know if that's a deliberate thing that people really tap into. And I think you see the leaders who actually do that because they don't stay in the same mode, or they don't revert back to, when pressure rises and then the bottom line starts tanking, you don't see them sort of reverting back to what they feel is, a command and control or whatever the case may be, which founder mode is kind of a little bit command and control.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And command and control has its place, doesn't it? In crises, in firefights, and so on, to keep people safe. I think it's interesting that, like, Dan, you bring up that adopting the mode then creates an environment where the mode doesn't need to be used. I think and then from that, you've then said there's a middle ground. I think what it makes me feel is that the ground moves all the time. And so I hadn't heard that the close of that loop. I hadn't heard that, like, because of Brian behaving like that, that most of his concerns have been addressed. So I actually think, well, knowing very little about it. I actually think, well, yeah, that's why you would run that as an experiment. I think that is a good thing. And so because there was I'm not very well read at all, but I saw a talk by a chap called Cameron Tonkinwise, who I really, really, really like.
I think the audience would digress with that statement that you're not very well read. You give us references
No.
each episode, man.
Me as well. Yeah, but
So
keep going, Matt.
Well, I'm just going to say the names of 2 books I have not read, but
Okay.
Cameron speaks about them in this talk that he gave, and the author is a very well-known author. I did a quick search then to see if I could remind myself of what it is, because then I think like I should probably read these books. But so this guy, he's called Paul something, wrote these books, I think, on the subject of like teaching. He was a professor or something, and I think in the 50s or something, so post-war years, space race, all that sort of stuff, that things have become very conservative. I think he wrote a book, I think it was called Teaching as a Subversive Act or whatever.
Mm.
And then, but the real point was, and so it was like, stop schooling, teach kids to be creative, stop schooling them to just think like one thing and this, that, and the other, and open their minds and stop putting all the structure around them. And then I think 10 years later, he wrote a follow-up book, which was Teaching as a Conservative Act, because he had seen that, sort of, people had gone too far the other way, and there was lots of subversion, and there was lots of counterculture. There'd been the rise of counterculture after the 60s and so on. And this guy's from the States, and you could probably, you can probably feel that in the history that you've lived through, is that so it was a hotbed of counterculture, Haight-Ashbury, the hippies, all this sort of stuff, and then so he's written this book called Teaching as a Conservative Act, and I think, and that to me is really good. It's good that those things happen. It's good that people see something and then encourage a shift, and see that becomes the norm and encourage a shift. I think the big thing that's important is the shifts from and where aren't as important as the action of shifting. And then I sort of feel like that there might not be I know what you mean when you say that. You might not mean what I'm thinking now, but that there isn't a middle ground. That it's just movement all the time.
Yeah.
And because a middle ground we would then settle, wouldn't you? You would settle on that middle ground, and then there would be something that would oppose it at some point, hopefully. And I think that's quite a good thing.
Well, I have as we've had this conversation, I've actually come up with a theory here, which is that I think it's something that the middle ground to me is something that approximates what David Marquet talks about with intent-based leadership, and it's making sure that people have the competence and the clarity so they can do the work, right? That this is important. When you look at something that experienced hyper growth like an Airbnb, where they grew so quickly, there wasn't time for the natural sort of Brian working with the people and making sure that they had that, and you just had to hire people and put them in place.
Yeah.
And so there was sort of this reactive, like, I need to be really involved because it didn't happen. So I need to make sure that's in place, and then I can step back, and it kind of gets to that place. Whereas, so to me, that's sort of what is happening, is what I'm seeing or sensing in this conversation. That's my theory, is that's sort of what happened, is that it was a hyper growth situation.
And and I can't put names or context on it, but I'm indirectly part of something very similar to that, where a group of people have a vision, right? The path to get to the platform which allows for that vision to take hold and become reality is riddled with challenges. Those challenges don't allow for them to have the time to properly set the structure, right? The sort of framework around that vision. Like, okay, how do we make this vision come to reality? What is the culture you want? What are the rules, do's and don'ts? Who's comfortable doing what? What are our rules of engagement, et cetera? And now that, um, that group of people has been afforded that platform, they didn't have the time to set up that structure. Now they're having to do it on the fly while they're dealing with, right, being in control of the ship, if you will. And so that's a way different challenge, even more complex, because now you're not just seen as the people who have a dream or have a vision, right, that we want to maybe check out and we want to get behind. You're seen as the people who are meant to bring solutions, right? And so you're sort of you don't have room for trial and error. Like the expectations are heightened. You're expected to bring about solutions and change and bring that vision to reality. And so, that echoes a lot with how you jump from one extreme where you're just allowing for space, time, and innovation, and everybody is just rallying behind one root cause, and it's a very grassroots oriented feel and approach. To now, when right, you're in charge, you have the keys. Okay, how do you then now that sort of ability to self-organize without making it a big deal is even more important. Like you have to figure it out and not, people don't care how you self-organize. You just got to figure it out and deliver. So that's another type of pressure and another type of another form of leadership, another type of political environment, right? Between those people who now have that pressure and have to figure it out on the fly. You know what I mean? Like, so that's,
That reminds me of, and Dan brought it up as well, that like in part one of this office politics, Dan was talking about bosses not caring about how people get things done. And I put a counterpoint into that they do care. And since then, I've actually thought, and I'm quite glad that we're having a part two, is that so I put this thing forward about, well, I think they do care. And then I said this thing whereby the ones who say they don't care, they absolutely do, especially when it goes wrong. And that's some of that is what I think what you're saying now. When you've got the keys. But I did actually want to come back to that and say I've reflected on that, and I've thought, actually, Dan, you're saying like they don't need to care as long as the right stuff's happening. They don't need to care. And I said, well, they should care. But I think you're absolutely right in that no matter how much I think they should, and I think it's a winning strategy to care and not just care when things go wrong, which I think is usually what happens when they say they don't care. But yeah, there are loads of people out there just don't care. And I think this is I think this brings us back to like a political stance that I'm wondering if you two have a certain view on this. Well, Dan being from the States, Sanjiri having spent a lot of time in the States and growing up being educated there. The States is a far more individualistic culture. It holds high achievers. It seems to think if you've been able to high achieve, you're probably, I don't know how to say this without sounding mean, but you're worth more than people who haven't achieved highly. Like you are a role model. Thing is, you can get there in lots of different ways. I think the further so in Europe, there's more of a collectivist thing. There's more of a social thing where, like, instead of I don't know how to say that, but like we're interested in a tide that raises all the ships. Whereas maybe in the States it's more like sink or swim. And then I think you go further east, so you go to I don't know, towards Japan. There's like an innate sort of social duty, sense of duty, that is that even like the flip of the individualistic is that to not have the humility of I am one amongst many is frowned upon, I think. And that, again, that might be a bit of a trope. We might have gone away from that, but I still think that exists in places like Japan. And out of Japan, lean is born and stuff like that. And I think those sort of like if you had those three sort of cultural aspects or cultural tropes, keep getting into that word, those can't help but influence the politics of nations, but also the politics within organizations. And I think that's I think so how office politics works in the US and how office politics might work, say, for example, in Paris or Budapest or whatever, and how office politics exists in Tokyo or whatever. I think they're very different things.
Yeah, I agree. But it's funny because I was just talking to my kids about because they've been, they have this thing where they want to go experience the US in ways more than just vacation, right? And so we've played about with the idea of, what would schooling be like for them? And I've had discussions with, other parents, friends who've thought about, hey, what would, my kid's life or schooling be like in the US? What was it for you? And I always, like, I went to school in the French system, I went to school in the American system. And so there's a huge misunderstanding in terms of, and I equate that to lack of understanding of how the US was born. I don't want to do the whole history thing here, but how the US was born, its DNA, which is intrinsically founded on diversity, which was forced because, some had slavery and all these, and one at one point also design with the immigration, right? We're bringing all these different nationalities to come help bring about labor and all these different things. And so, and that's 400 years, so, or around that time. So my personal, I say that to say, despite that, my personal experience has been that I've been taught, I think there is a side that teaches you confidence, individualism, being able to step up. And so that's why Americans are often seen in corporate spaces when they navigate from a job in Asia or a job in Paris. I'm always seen as, I've been called Obama, like, you know what I mean? Like, because I step up with a certain confidence, I speak loud, I articulate in a specific way. And those are things that I learned in the American space. There's also something else that I've learned that which is, funny because it's a direct bridge into my job today, which is helping people connect and create value together. In the French schooling system, it was all about, taking a poem or a lesson and learning it individually. I had very little work, which was collective. Whereas in the States, it's the complete opposite. A lot of your work is group projects, and you learn at a very early age to not only figure things out as a team, like, okay, because at some point, like, like, how are we going to figure this out together? Hey, the guy that's winging it, dude, you're winging it. We're not going to do all this work for you. You're going to, you know what I mean? Just float and coast to an A, right? Community service is a big part of, the schooling system in the States and just community overall. And that's why when you see like these huge tornadoes or all these, fires or whatever the case, these catastrophes that happen, people, no matter black, white, Asian, Republican, Democrat, they rally, right? And so that's sort of the dichotomy and the complexity of American society. So there's a lot of, yes, individualistic things where it's like sink or swim, but there's a lot of good that especially at least in the schooling system, there's a lot of things they don't get right, but that part they do get right. So it's funny how, and how that translates over into corporate spaces, right? If you compare, when people go and do these Google tours or Facebook, what are they imbued by? They're imbued by the teamwork aspect, the collective aspect. Whereas in Paris, I'm spending the first 6 months of every single mission, damn near, teaching people to figure it out as a team together. Like
Yeah.
understand each other, hear each other out, figure out that team dynamic, team canvas. Okay, what do I like? What is my background? How do we then come together? What's our purpose? What's our vision?
Mm.
Why are we brought together? So that's constantly the brunt of my work is doing that in these spaces out here. So this is just
Yeah.
interesting. Just yeah.
That's interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
It sheds light, doesn't it?
If you,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes I might sort of use extremes to try and understand those things. I think what part of what I've heard there is something that I sort of feel might be universal. So when in crisis, communities come together. I think sometimes when there was a thing over here a little while ago for one of the David Cameron when he was prime minister, he did this thing about like he wanted big communities, not big government. And so he sort of reduced the size of government, which we pay our taxes for, which would help us in times of crisis, sort of there to help us in times of crisis. And so I sort of still feel that that's like a sink or swim. A community coming together is a community saying to everybody else, well, we're going to swim and we're going to swim together. And I think that sort of feels universal. So I don't think I'm sold on that as a that is a singular attribute of the states.
No.
yeah,
I do view it as more individualistic.
I mean, I'd put it
in those
different
positions in the first place.
Yeah, I'd put it differently, right? I mean, I look at the other day I saw talking about memes. I saw a meme that said about American politics. It says, "I like my coffee black and my tea in the bay or in the harbor." Right, nod back to the Boston Tea Party. And if you think about how the United States was founded, those events, it was a rebellion from the rule of the monarchy and saying, "Hey, we're all the way out here, months away by ship from you all ruling us. Like, why the heck and you don't even understand what's going on over here. Why should you be ruling us? And why should we be like, we don't even get a vote? Like what? Like, so it was this whole rebellion. And so I think there's a very rebellious spirit within Americans generally, or at least there has been historically. And if you go back to, one of the things that Reagan used to cite is de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. And he loved this one part of the book where de Tocqueville talks about how there's a problem and the people, they don't go to some government bureaucrat to go fix it. What they do is they come together as a neighborhood and they have a conversation. They just fix the problem, right? So they're not out there going like, oh, well, okay, there's a problem. Let's go have somebody go fix this thing. They just go do it. And to me, that is more what I see as the American spirit is like, we're not going to wait for someone to go fix it. Or like, hey, the other day, I go for walks and there's this sidewalk that the greenery is growing like 2/3 of the way into the sidewalk. And you have to walk in the street, a very busy street. It's dangerous. Sure, there's probably a number I could have called. Someone probably would have cleaned it up, but I just went with my gardening tools out there and I cleaned it up because I'm like, well, I walk here and I'm tired of it. And I just cleaned it. That's just because, and I thought, well, I might get in trouble I actually had the thought I might get in trouble for this. Like there might be a cop that comes by. I don't own this land. I have no clue who does, but it's a problem and I'm just going to fix it. And there's that's sort of a rebellious spirit in that where some people might sit back and say, well, no. And just one more point is that we're talking about extremes. I don't know the founding all the nations, so I couldn't tell you why Japan behaves the way they do culturally. I don't know. But I know like Germany tends to be rule followers, especially post World War II. Like this is just a thing about them is they're very big on following rules. Apparently, I'm told. Is that
Allegedly?
Yeah, Dennis Quaid was being interviewed about playing Ronald Reagan in this Reagan movie, and I saw that this morning. And he was talking about he voted for Carter, and then he voted for Reagan, and he's independent. And he said, I think Democrats and Republicans need each other because they help us stay balanced. And so I think that there's probably more collectivist type governments and things out there, and we might be more individualistic, but I think we need each other because it helps us get to a better middle.
Mm.
Yeah,
No, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. And
and
maybe there needs to be two-party systems aren't that good, are they? I was going to ask you a question. Sorry, I talked over
go
you.
ahead.
I was going to ask you a question about so like bringing it back to the corporate sphere and jobs and stuff like that. There's a comic, like a magazine type thing in the UK called Viz Comic. It's a juvenile comic, but it's for adults.
Okay.
And
Check it out.
it has a letters section called letterbox, and there's some funny stuff in there. Sometimes people send stuff. People are funny and people send stuff in, but sometimes like the people from the comic put stuff in, and it's obviously it's all made up. Everyone's
Right.
making everything up in this, but there's one that always makes me giggle every time it sort of comes up on social media, and it's this. Do you have? If I said oil of Olay, do you know what oil of Olay is? It's like a skincare treatment, and
Yeah.
it's been around for ages.
Yeah.
And in the UK, a long time ago, it used to be called Oil of Ulay, and then it changed its name. Like a lot of things in the UK are named different things, and then all of a sudden we change our name to the thing that everyone else in the world calls it. So it's called Oil of Olay now, and there's a letter that got sent in, and it says, and the tagline is that it fights the 7 signs of aging. So this letter goes, Ole keep claiming they fight the 7 signs of aging. Does that include becoming more right wing? Because that's the really problematic one. So, so I know, yes, it's an
Yeah.
extreme, it's comedy.
Yeah.
Um, but there is a thing like, and it says more right wing, but there is a thing that, as you get older, we are seen to become generally small c more conservative. Uh, and not only see, it seems logical because you've gone through your whole life and you've accrued
Yeah.
and you feel like, oh, I've gone through my whole life accruing this stuff. I don't just want to give it up now. So you sort
Mm.
of tend to um, move towards a more individualistic outlook from what might have been a more like, well, when I was young, I had now, so I want a piece of everyone else's, so I'm going to vote so that everyone gets something. And then as
Yeah.
I build stuff up, I'm voting just for me to keep this. Do you think like founder mode again is like one of these things whereby because a lot of these founder mode people, a lot of the people who look up to Steve Jobs, started their own businesses, and do you think that like when they started them, a lot of them had these outlooks where they were going to do a lot of good in the world, and then as they get more successful, and as they get more people, like they just want to fight to keep. I work very hard for my $1 billion.
I mean,
These buggers
I,
under here
uh,
are feckless. If I
yeah.
wasn't down in the weeds getting them to do the stuff, I wouldn't have my billion. Oh, actually, 2 billion now. Oh, hang on, three. Um, so I'm fighting really hard to do that. And if I didn't, do you feel like that's the thing? Like you go
I,
further
yeah.
up, a more small C conservative.
I think, I
Don't
think,
want
I think, I think once you make the type of money that's being made in tech, right, and you start to navigate the spheres of world leaders and politicians,
to.
you get invited to World Economic Forums, G7s, right? Your brand is being thrown in those big societal shift conversations. Um, you know, you whether you by design had it in you before, like a Zuckerberg or a Musk, I think did. I think they were born kind of, or at a very young age, had that sense of what type of legacy, right? Which is why they had these really grand, outsized visions, right, of like humanity and tech and humanity and where I what I want my place to be in helping design that. Yeah, you're gonna succumb to that. It's the same as a young, kid from a really modest background who rises the ranks and becomes president, right? And so, the higher up you go, the more you're going to start worrying about things that may be more because legacy is it's for all, but it's through you.
So it's
It's
about
what
you.
you've done, right? It is. So it's a huge
Yeah.
ego trip kind of thing, right? And so and so yeah, I agree. I think that the higher up you get, or the going back into founder mode thing is there's a big self-serving part to that, right? Because you can, it's tougher, but you can still influence and design for all while not being in founder mode. It's much more difficult, right? When you're not
Yeah.
on the board who are making these decisions for profit, whatever, that shift the dynamics either right or left. But I think I think naturally the higher up you go, the air is thinner, and the more you're gasping for your own air to kind of, right. And then I think, legacy, vision, what's the world I want to leave behind? Sometimes they're really way far out there compared to the guy who's right pulling the and on line, going for the lean, right? Who's saying, hey, I just need this production issue, this recurring production issue just to get fixed, right?
Yeah,
So I mean, yeah, that gap is a bitch.
It's be hard work to
Yeah.
I mean, they say, don't they, the saying is power corrupts.
Yeah.
So it influences your thought processes, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Your worldview. And it does that on its own, I think. So you'd have to expend a lot of energy for it not to.
Yeah, I mean that's why the whole staying firmly grounded, keeping your feet planted, by either finding ways to come back down to Middle Earth,
Doing the Gemba walk, you just said
right,
someone pulls an
and
hand
I
on
think some
cord.
politicians
Go
have
look.
done. Yeah, some
Yeah.
politicians do that great. They don't wait every election cycle. They make it a point to systematically go back to the people, knock on some doors, listen to stories, try to relate back to what they once were, right, or their parents were, and I think and I think every leader does that in some way, shape, or form. We talk about Gemba walking, all these different things, but and I think if you don't do that, it's only normal that it's like flying business. You're going from coach to start flying business, and your sky priority, right? And you have a different level of expectation when you're traveling now. Like it's just normal. Like, hey,
I'm not coming. I do not come across the Atlantic unless I can lay down flat. I'm sorry.
see
It just
that?
doesn't
There we
happen.
go. Where some people just like, dude, put me in the sort of dock cage in the cargo area. I'll fly to Paris anytime.
Just get me
So
there, yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's human nature. It's human nature. I think it's all about how we, like you said, Dan, going to that, sort of swaying back and forth. How do you put in checks and balances in a way where you can keep enough conversation going where there's an equilibrium being had, and you're not sort of waiting until like as with the last French election where it's like, hey, now we're going to be labeled as a right-wing country. Let's all rally now, and so it's eggs already on
I
the
don't
table.
know.
Oh,
Frankly,
God.
I don't know how France ever gets labeled as right wing, because I tell people I love Paris and I love France. I'm a big Francophile. I hate their politics. It's the one country I know, and I always use this example, where the unemployed can go on strike. And I'm not going to use the word, I would say blank you not. I am not joking that the way they went on strike, because this was years ago, there was a news article, because they weren't getting vacation pay. The unemployed went on strike because they weren't getting vacation pay. And the
Yeah.
way that they went on strike, like, how did the unemployed go on strike? They lay in the railways. I'm like, this is mind-boggling to me that like we're going to go on strike by laying in the railways because we're not getting vacation pay. Anyway, I hate their
Del-
politics. Great
Del-
country.
yeah, delve into the French Revolution. It'll explain a lot. History always explains quite a bit there. So, but yeah.
But I mean, that goes into things again in the corporate world that so I just find that interesting. I find that fascinating that a collective action like that for a thing like that can work.
Mm.
So that just begs me to ask you the question now, what do you think of a universal basic income?
Oh, me personally, I hate it. I don't think I wouldn't do it. No. I mean, but that comes from, again, I'm an American, individualistic thing, like this idea of a
Yeah.
universal base. And as someone that studied economics, I say, if you gave everybody $3,000 a month, well, then essentially the price of everything goes up, because I've now just given everybody else, like everything, we just raised the price of everything. I mean, all it does is inflate things.
But that only if they're allowed to just keep raising prices, only if they're allowed to gouge.
And that's the
And
part
you
where
could
I
put
would
something in
resist.
place that meant you couldn't. You know, there's some other index that it's linked to.
That's why I mean, you can't have these conversations without including the conversation on, you know, what is our society being built for? Is it being built for
Yeah.
a for-profit capitalistic approach, or is it being built for a sort of balanced world where everybody has access to health, education, you know, food, at
Leisure
least the
time.
basics, right? And
Time that isn't spent working. And I think, I mean, this comes up a lot, doesn't it? Now, technology with AI. So, you know, AI is going to steal my job, or AI is going to do the jobs I don't want to do. Like, will AI steal my income? Will someone bring in bots so and not pay me and lay me off? That's a very real concern. Um,
Oh.
why would that happen? It would happen because people decide for it to happen. Probably people with the power and the money go, you're not getting it. I've bought a load of bots. But where does that leave society? And I think, again, so like going back to inside the corporate world, there are decisions that happen like that inside the corporate world where
oh
there
yeah,
could
for
be a
sure.
decision that makes like everybody's every day a bit easier, a bit happier, a bit
Mm-hmm.
less stressful. And we could still, you know, turn a profit. We might not turn as big of a profit, but it all depends what the politics of the organization is in terms of what do we see value is. You know, do we value profit above everything? Do we value market capitalization? Do we value stakeholder shareholder value above the people that are in here? And there's lots of organizations who do it in one way and do it in another. You know there are holacracies, aren't there? And there are um, employee owned places. There are cooperatives.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, and even if you look at the youth today, there's a lot of them are having, you know, been privy to some conversations in academia out here, you know, kids, quote unquote, who are just graduating or getting ready to leave grad school and stuff. And you know, they ask me for, you know, recommendations or insights into some of the companies I've been able to work with within luxury or in the banking sector. And, you know, they're really trying to grapple with, you know, how I serve my purpose in this world and what that overall purpose of that company is. Is it just the bottom line for profit? And in luxury, most times it is, you know,
yeah,
which is why, you know, more margin, more margin, more margin, right? And so that's why, you know, there'll be more, you know, maybe sort of they'll use, you know, a company, you know, for-profit company for a sort of as a platform to, you know, get a better resume or be better seen or have better exposure. And then, you know, they'll start, you know, there's a big thing now with these benefit corporations in France and in Europe overall, you know, where, you know, we're not, our commitment legally is tied to social and environmental sustainability. Now, obviously, yeah, there's a big debate on how do you actually prove that, right? With numbers, what are the numbers that actually prove your social and economic and, or, you know, environmental, you know, and through the projects and the products and the things that you push out, services, or the things you get involved with. But that's a huge question. But by and large, we're driven by for-profit companies today who the very people who work inside those companies, even though they love working there and then the things that are afforded to them in those environments are at odds with, you know, when certain decisions are made, right? Economic downturn or, you know, do I go right or left on this situation? You know, so it's you know, I think we're going to go through a lot more periods of storming, right? In terms of, you know, in the corporate space, and that's going to spill over into politics, into the office and outside, as we you know work through these conversations in terms of what's good for society, you know.
Well, there is a tie between outside and inside, obviously, right? I mean, it's just a
Mm-hmm.
subsystem.
Mm-hmm.
The corporate is just a subsystem.
Yep.
And, you know, given my sort of individualistic American outtake, and also the fact that I studied economics, I'm a very, very big Chicago school of thought, free market economics type of person. Like I look at things For example, I look at something like corporate pay, and I absolutely agree when people say executive pay has gotten way out of hand. They're paid way too much money, and the gap is huge. And I look at that and I take a very Ronald Reagan approach of, when he says government is not the solution to the problem, government is the problem. And I say, well, you realize that part of the reason that exists, I take a look at the system, is because some people came together and they put in a law, and that law says that as soon as you acquire X percentage of a company's publicly traded stock, you have to announce that you plan to buy more and take over the company. It used to be you didn't have to announce that. And what would happen is somebody would say, yep, those idiots are overpaying themselves and I can run that company better and have it be more profitable. And so my self-interest is I'm going to buy that company and do it. And I'm going to throw those clowns out. But you can't do it anymore because the second you've acquired, I think it's either 5 or 10% of this, whatever it is, you have to say, hey, I intend to acquire this company. That's what I'm doing. And then the price of the stock goes, you can't do it anymore. So the system's broken. But that's because of some inane law that probably executives supported so that they could protect themselves. And I think that's silly. And I think that the self-interest, like I'm a very Adam Smith, invisible hand, like the self-interest of people, it will get you to the right solution. And I know that causes, like, Matt and I are probably going to disagree on that, right? And I know that, like, I understand this, but like that, I come from that starting point of like, I think that the self-interest is gonna, like, I think you're going to get to the right, the market will find a solution. And I think it's the least bad. I don't think there's a perfect, like I say out there, I don't think there's a perfect way to get to it. I think the least bad is free markets, but that's me.
Yeah.
Is that your wrap up, Dan?
Yeah, I guess that's my wrap up.
Free market
Did
it
you want
is.
to? Did you want to say anything else about that? Well, no, you are saying that is about corporate life, isn't it? Economy, global economies, and free markets, and how people behave inside organizations to either support that or not, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And they're not, I mean, a company is by its nature not a free market, right? R.H. Coase talks about it in, there's a book called The Firm, the Market, and the Law, where it's just a collection of essays. And he's the guy that wrote the Coase, that's the Coase theorem that talks about externalities and, as long as you place private property rights somewhere, it gets figured out. And of course, there's a transaction cost issue. But so he talks about what is the cause, the economic cause of going from like a person building a thing to bringing a group of people together. Once you've got that group of people, it isn't a free market. It isn't. It's a company and there's a structure and so it's a different operating entity. But I think the free markets allow for that to happen and to experiment with you guys that we're talking about, you've got different business models. Well, free markets allow you to try whichever one is more successful, go do that.
Yeah. But I mean, I think again, that's why, I mean, I'm fascinated by Adam Smith and, just economics in general, because I think they're sort of a pathway into, and I always tell people understand the business of economics. Once you do that, you can have a better chance of having a holistic view and understanding of all how these complex things are sort of interwoven. But again, I mean, I think all of this theory that we've all kind of been brought up on, and the West has been brought up on, and I say the West because that's what's been pushed so far. That's what drove the Marshall Plan. That's what's driving sort of capitalistic, the capitalist approach today. For the most part, which China has now gone and turned on its head, in a way. But I think if you just take free markets will be fine. But if I just take, for example, the dollar being the de facto currency through which all value is judged, that's a huge caveat to that theory. So, and that's why I think it's important to understand those different caveats, whether it be in a global context or in a purely corporate single entity, right? Is because if you don't understand them, right, and you have, again, people standing on different sides of the fence and arguing over something which has no merit, because all the parameters that make that theory of free market and everything possible aren't there, right? Because and that's just one. It's not, that's not the only one. There's in terms of, you look at geopolitics, and we could go on and on about this, but yeah, I feel like And that's the same with frameworks. I think John Cutler, and I'll close with that, had a thing about frameworks. I think these, Adam Smith, his thesis on the economics, it's a framework, right? And I think Cutler's piece was saying that frameworks are great, but I think when the caveats are not exposed or properly understood, right, for that framework to be implemented within that specific context or that global context, that's when we run into trouble. So, line with that.
Yeah, I'll wrap up with I don't know. Well, so my global politics thing would be is a quote that I quite like from Kurt Vonnegut, and actually I've seen Donella Meadows cited for it as well. But like, we'll go down in history as the first society that wouldn't save itself because it wasn't cost effective. So with that wrapped up in profit making, that we do forget this thing about, are we happy? Can we make people happier and so on? And we're so just over indexed onto making money, I suppose. And like you're saying about the dollars, like this is like, it used to be, it's like, it used to be that like that paper money used to denote some gold somewhere, didn't it? Or some precious thing somewhere. And then obviously there's not enough gold in the world, and you do quantitative easing, and you shove all this paper out there in the world, and it's just a fiat. It's a fiat currency, which just it is the currency because we all agree. And if people start disagreeing to a greater or lesser extent, that's put at risk. And I think sort of like my my sort of politics going into the corporate world sort of thing. As I worked for a local authority a while back with a chap called Steve, who brought me in there, super chap. And he, as I was leaving, he'd previous to that, he was the strategy director of strategy. Previous to that, he started his political life off in think tanks in Westminster. And this think tank that he was working with had produced a white paper, and I can't remember the actual title, but the gist of it was, and I think how he described it to me is, the message that we're putting is, we get the politicians we deserve. And basically the title was really, and the narrative was about, there is a lack of engagement in politics, and therefore people who we wouldn't like in power fill that void. And I think this episode and episode 1 definitely is about, we'll get the bosses we deserve unless we find a voice, unless we engage in some way. And engagement doesn't necessarily mean shouting or finding a voice for those who don't like speaking up, but acting. Choose how we act, and try not to feel like you don't have some sort of power. Don't let people tell you you don't have power, even if it's scary, even if you feel like, I can't exert this power because I can't afford to lose this job, which is an awful position to be in. And I don't want to say anything flippantly, but work out a way of engaging, work out a way of changing something if you don't like it, and if you don't engage, and if you do engage, you get the bosses you deserve.
That could be a future episode of how do you engage?
Yeah.
How do you engage?
We'd have to talk about, in my world, we'd have to talk about agility again, and no, maybe we don't want to just talk about agility all the time. But yeah,
we could. I think it's not a taboo topic. I think we could definitely engage in that. How do you engage? I think it's very interesting. There's ways of engaging and ways of alliance building, ways of, coming together for a specific thing, or, just having a specific reading from afar and engaging in different ways. So there's different ways to engage. That could be food for thought.
Cool. Well,
all right.
It's been a great conversation.
Well, I think
that was awesome. That was good. It was needed. I missed a Sunday conversation, so thank you for filling the Sunday evening. And to the audience, we'll see you guys real quickly. Ciao, ciao.
See you soon.
Thanks for joining us today on Flâneurs, available wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, you know what to do.